Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about how lack of alignment within your organization might be stunting your growth. And joining us to contribute to the conversation is Jim Stevenson. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, Jenna.
So glad to have you on our show today. Can you share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. I've spent probably 20 something years. I don't like being specific about the number, it ages me. 20 something years helping companies to find opportunities to grow. And a lot of that centers around marketing, go-to-market plans, alignment, strategy, transformation, those types of things. So working with the likes of Bacardi in the US, Marks and Spencer's in the UK, Scout 24 in Switzerland, and other global companies. Essentially, I spent 20 years finding those opportunities for them.
Nice. Well, alignment seems to be a really challenging thing within organizations, especially as you scale. I guess I'd like to chat a little bit around if you see things that actually help companies, because when you're small and you can just talk to people, it's actually not terribly difficult to stay aligned. But as soon as you're getting to multiple leaders within the organization, 50, 100 people, even at that size, it's a little harder. So what are some things that you see work well in like from a scaling perspective, that help organizations stay aligned?
Yeah, I mean, just from what you're saying there of the smaller companies growing, I think actually I'll start with what will kill your company very quickly.
Okay.
Because it kind of leads into what you need to do to grow your company. Culture. When companies start to grow, the culture starts to go. And without the right culture, you're done for. Especially as you grow, because what you end up seeing, in my experience at least, is that the culture starts to lose. And what you find is people start becoming ambitious within the company and they start looking after themselves. So it's like, I'm the marketing guy and this is my team, or I'm operations and this is my team. And that's great because you want to have that alignment within your team, but you need alignment across your whole organization. Otherwise, what you start to develop is silos. Your marketing team operates great, but your sales team isn't quite as effective. Or your marketing is fantastic, but customer service isn't working, or the product hasn't quite met the customer's needs. And you have great divisions and departments within your company, but unless they're working really, really well across everything, what you find is that these silos create little gaps between the functions. And that's where customer experience drops. That's where customers get frustrated. That's where you start to lose opportunities. And losing opportunities is where you lose revenue.
So what do you see as the cause, though, behind that, the silos starting to get created?
It comes down to a lack of alignment at the very top. The North Star, your vision of the company starts to, it's still there, but people don't talk about it, or they're not as passionate about it from when you start to grow. You lose that culture of, we're a startup, we're all in this together, we're working together for the same objective, to, I've got a 9 to 5 job, I'm just here to do whatever I need to do. And yeah, I'm not really as drawn into the objective and the vision of the company that I used to be, or I would have been in a different organization. So that alignment starts to wane a little, because people aren't quite as kind of focused on what they're trying to achieve as an organization. And it becomes more about those little silos. I'm the best marketer in this company, but that doesn't help the company. So it's that lack of vision. It's the vision's still there, but people aren't paying attention to it quite as much. And then it gets into a lack of leadership. And whether that's at the board level or the CEO level or the C-suite level, it has the same impact. People no longer are working to the same outcomes and the same objectives. So you very often find in organizations that each of the functions will have their own KPIs, their own metrics. But at no point has anyone actually said, do these all align? Is the timeline for delivering all of these the same? Are we all going to achieve this in this next 12 months? And you'll find some people have some for 3 months or 6 months. Some people will have some for 18 months, and they'll have a vision of what's happening in 3 years. But the reality is they all need to align. And if they're not aligned, then you've got a fundamental mismatch in where people are going. And quite literally, people are not on the same page. And that's where you start to get the confusion, the alignment goes, and customers and revenue and growth suffer because of it.
And so do you recommend like the OKR practice out of IBM, or is there something that you recommend in keeping organizations, their goals and KPIs aligned?
I love the OKR process. I know it came out of IBM, but Google kind of inherited it and took it and expanded it. I like the addition that Google added onto it, that you should only be able to achieve 70% of your OKR, because that drives people to do more. It means that failure is built into your OKRs. If you're meeting 100% of your OKR was too easy. And you've not been challenged enough. You're not driving yourself forward enough, and you're not driving the business forward enough. So I love OKRs, and I think OKRs should come from the board down. So rather than just having one layer of OKR, I think you should have the OKRs in layers as they come down, and they should all be pyramiding up to the ultimate vision of the company in the next 3 to 5 years. That's a really, really good way of doing it. But I think alongside that, it's really important to understand the difference of what OKRs are trying to do with what your metrics are trying to do.
Okay.
OKRs should be challenging. They should be driving you. They should be making aspirations and what you're trying to achieve. Your metrics should be recording what you've done. So even if you've got leading metrics rather than lagging metrics, metrics predominantly are what you've done. The leading metrics then play into your OKRs and what you're trying to achieve and what you need to influence to achieve those things. So very often people talk about OKRs, and because they need to be data driven and really tangible things, you get mixed up with what an OKR is and what your metrics are. We've got metrics, so we're okay. That's not what your OKRs are. Your OKRs are fundamentally more aligned. They're aligned to what you're trying to achieve in the next 3 months, 12 months, 3 years, 5 years, and they should be aspirational. Everyone should be pushing to achieve something, and it should be okay to fail. Not everything. You don't want everyone to fail everything all in the same quarter. That would just be disastrous. But they should be challenging enough that everyone fails, because then they've been pushing themselves beyond their own comfort zones.
And just for our audience sake, in case they haven't studied OKRs, it's objectives and key results, and it started out of IBM, and like you said, Google then enhanced it. Do you have advice on practical ways, I guess, of going through that exercise? Because I've seen some software out there that you can use, and I've seen Agile do it a lot with their scaled Agile with their methodology on how to try to deliver in a quarter, all the company in alignment. But I've seen very few companies actually do it well. So curious if what you've seen around, the practical side of doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on a couple of things there that I'll drill into. One, scaled Agile. I'm an Agile guy. I love Agile. Agile was a game changer for me when I kind of first started looking at it 15, 20 years ago. I dislike scaled Agile because it breaks the first principle of Agile of people over process. Scaled Agile tends to put a process in, forgetting about the people. So I'm much more a fan of less as a methodology, because it keeps the people in the loop there. And that people in the loop also then keeps the culture going. But I think you're right. I think there's a number of tools out there that will help you do that. I'm a fan of whiteboards. I'm a fan of Excel. I'm a fan of Google Sheets, or Google, whichever the spreadsheet one is, Google Sheets, yeah. And the reason I like that is because if you follow a tool, the tool kind of forces you into the mentality that you've got to get it right and you've got to get it perfect. And like you, I've not seen anyone do this well. Not even good. I think I've not seen anyone do this well. But I think good is good enough in most cases. And I think starting it, it's like when you've got an objective and you're trying to get your key results. Everyone is this a good key result? And it's like, well, I don't really know. I mean, it's what you're trying to achieve and where you're getting to. But I think with all OKRs, the trick is perfect doesn't work. It doesn't exist. starting is the key. It's like everything in Agile, everything in startup world.
Right.
It's a really good mindset. It's like, just start. It will be
Mm.
wrong, except the fact that, you know what, for the first 3 or 6 months you're doing this, it will be terrible. It won't even just be bad. It will just be terrible. But you've started. And as you start, you learn. And then as you learn, you start improving. And then after 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, the only thing I would advise is if you're doing 12-month OKRs, I think that's too long. I'm a huge fan of 3-month windows for planning purposes. If you get into Agile, you can do your weekly, fortnightly sprints. That's great. And you plan those as well. But for planning purposes, I like quarters. And I think if you're just starting out in your OKR journey, quarters are really good because you get to learn quickly. It's only kind of like 6 months and you've gone through 2 cycles and you've learned what works and what kind of doesn't work. And then you're going into your third quarter and you're feeling a bit more confident in what you're doing and hopefully the results that you can achieve with it.
So we were talking about KPIs earlier, and like and obviously measuring whether it's part of the OKRs or measuring as part of the KPIs is a really critical piece to understand where you were and where you've gotten to and where you're going, for that matter. One of the challenges, though, the colloquialism is you get what you measure. And sometimes there's unintended consequences in lots of measurements. And I guess sometimes you have to accept those unintended consequences. But do you have, I guess, insights and ideas around how to approach finding the right metrics and, really evaluating if it's gonna get the behaviors that you are after?
Yeah, I mean, that's when you get into test and learn predominantly, especially if you're thinking about consumers and your customers using whichever tools or websites or products that you're providing them with. Testing and learning is a huge thing. But I think you're right. There's always unintended consequences. And for that, for me, I think you need to be clear. Doing some scenario planning helps. So what if this happens? What if that happens? But you need to be clear on what your main objective is. This is the one thing that we're trying to achieve. And if other things break along the way, then we can live with that. If other things break, we may have to do some contingency planning and jump in and fix something if it's really bad and it was unforeseen. But I think focus on the key things that will get you to where you want to get to. Because that's the 80-20 rule. I'm going to achieve 80% of my objective and I might break 20%, but I can fix that later. So yeah, for me, that's always the kind of way to go. It is a bit of test and learn, except again that you're going to get it wrong. Hopefully you get it mainly right. But that's the whole point of it, is that you get in there, you try it, you see what happens, you learn from it, you change it and you improve on it.
And then, so how much should, I guess, is there a point that you're doing too much pivoting and adjusting? I mean, I guess what I'm thinking is, I wonder if sometimes, you don't see the results, right? So you start to question whether or not you're doing the right thing. I often think about Great on Purpose, I think it was, where Jim Collins talks about the Million Mile March or something like that, but it's doing the same thing every day and it doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere. But eventually you do. So any thoughts around like how to know that you're doing the right thing, a company's headed the right direction, and it just takes time, versus you're off track somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really good question. I think it depends on the size of company and what you're aiming for. I think if you're in a slightly bigger company, 50, 100, 200 people, it's easier to get in their metrics because you're changing and improving something. So you can see your baseline, you can see how you're measuring it. And one of the things that most people forget to do at the start is to put a time horizon on it. If I change this metric, I'm not going to see the results for 3 months. Or if I change this metric, if you're in retail, you can change a metric and see the results in hours. But there's no point in kind of giving yourself a 3-month window to change something, and then 3 hours into it go, oh man, this isn't working. What are we doing? So set yourself a time scale where your metrics will actually have a significant impact and you can see what's happening with it. I think the real challenge is smaller entrepreneurial companies, where you might be doing something that you've never done before, that no one has ever done before, in which case you are going to make a lot of mistakes. You are going to go down some wrong roads. And one of the things I think is the key to success as being an entrepreneur is that persistence. It's knowing that what you're trying to achieve is the right thing to achieve, and accepting that how you implement it you're going to have to change. You will make small pivots, you'll make big pivots, but what you're trying to achieve is what you're there for. And it's that unwavering passion to achieve that will keep you going. And I don't think there's any tool that I'm aware of, or any process that I'm aware of, that says you're on the right track. It's belief at that point. For entrepreneurs, it's belief. I think for everyone else, it's making sure that you can start to see the small signs of what's happening, little shoots before you see the big change. But be clear in your head before you start what time frame you're giving yourself to achieve those results.
Yeah, that makes sense. They're, in large companies, they're big behemoths of a thing. And so they're hard to turn. And so obviously I think, alignment is even more important, because you're trying, like, that's the only way you're going to get it to shift course.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around a company who is trying to shift direction that, has a lot of people, and how do they, 1,000 plus whatever people, how do they get that organization to shift?
That's a brilliant question, to be honest. And I'm going to start off with a failure.
Mm.
So we've all had failures. I didn't actually work for this company, but I had several meetings with this company, and it was a large insurance company in the UK. And they wanted to go through an agile transformation piece. And I was talking to them, and I was getting on great with them. But every time I'd speak to them, they'd always bring out a project plan. And I was kind of, you're not quite understanding where agile is coming from. It's less about planning. It's going to take you 3 weeks to do this and 1 week to do that. It's more about setting the team up in the right way and empowering the team, and giving your teams, whether it's in software development or customer service or marketing, it's about giving your teams the environment to flourish and giving them the outcomes that you want to try and achieve to move forward. And then I'd go back in again in a week's time, and they'd say, we've updated our project plan, and it's now saying this. And it's like, yeah, okay, let's stop talking about agile being a change process. Let's talk about your culture within the company. What culture are you trying to get out of this? And to be honest, they just didn't get it. They've been so ingrained in this traditional project management world that they couldn't move their mind over to it. And ultimately, I wasn't the guy that they were looking for to change the company, and I've no idea whether they actually changed the company or not, to be fair. But equally, the alternative one is probably Marks and Spencer's in the UK. So for your listeners that don't know Marks and Spencer's, it's a large retailer. It was always very iconic in the UK because it's just been around for decades and decades. At the time I was there, it was turning over 10 billion, had tens of thousands of employees. They were, I need to make sure I don't say anything that I shouldn't. They had just started, or they were just coming to the end of changing their web presence. So for years, their website had been based off of Amazon, and it was a silly strategy, because essentially they were giving their biggest competitor a lot of money to run their web presence. So they'd been moving it off, and it'd taken them 3 years, I think, to go through a program to move that platform and the internal processes. And they suddenly got to a point where they thought, this isn't going to have the financial benefit that we think it's going to have. It suddenly got very cold feet 3 years in, and they suddenly thought, this isn't working for us. We're not going to get the returns. We've spent hundreds of millions on this thing, and it's not going to give us the returns we want. So a friend of mine asked if I would go in and help. And I started to help them go through this agile process of changing how they had aligned the teams. When you're aligning teams behind things, you've also got to make sure you've got the right team. And one of the problems that Marks and Spencer's had was they were engineer heavy. They didn't have enough user experience designers, and they didn't have enough product managers. So we had to reconfigure the teams so that the teams were aligned, so they could deliver something from start to finish and work on it. And we restructured the teams. We gave them certain products that they were owning, and they owned it. They had all the metrics. They could do what they wanted. They had to pitch to us what their roadmap was to contribute to the bigger roadmap and all of those kind of things. But the starting point of that, to get everyone excited about it, was I took a small, essentially a Skunks Works team. I think there were 6 of us. And in this grand vision they had for changing their website, they forgot about the iPad. And we discovered that the iPad was actually 30% of their revenue online. And they just didn't do it. So when you looked at the new website on the iPad, your fingers were too big, you weren't pressing the buttons, and it was insane. So we took 6 of their team offline. We were constrained by their release process, so we couldn't release as quickly as we'd like. So I think we were doing a release every 2 or 3 weeks, 2 weeks, because we did it all in 8 weeks. And we baselined the iPad experience. 6 guys then made some changes to it. We'd do a release every 2 weeks, and we'd test where we were going. And after the 8 weeks of it, we relaunched the iPad experience of the online system. And we could then, because we'd baselined it, we knew that if they'd gone live to the public, their revenue would drop 1%, which was about 3 million in a year. So it was a big number. But after we'd done this work in the 8 weeks, I knew that they would increase their revenue by 1%. So 6 guys over 8 weeks made a 6 million a year difference to their revenue number. And when you can prove that what you're doing is the right thing to do, you can prove that this realignment, this new way of working, that this way of actually getting everyone on board to do the same thing, suddenly we had people coming actually saying, how can I get my team to do this? And it got that excitement going. So very often the way to make these changes is to take a small thing and prove that it works. And then actually you can start planning the bigger, more widespread and more impactful programs.
But with a company that size, like how do you get them all focused on the top 1 to 3 goals, right? Like we shouldn't really have more than 3 because you definitely can't achieve them. But versus, oh yeah, I don't touch that part of the business that much, so I'm going to go work on this side project of mine, but it could still detract because they're not siloed, right? Like, so it's still, you could still have unintentional impacts on other teams when you're working side projects. So how did they get that type of alignment across such a large organization?
Yeah, and like everything in classic project management, how do you eat the elephant? You cut it up into small pieces. That's exactly the same way as large organizations are. So with Marks and Spencer's, I didn't touch the entire organization. I touched the e-commerce aspects of the organization. But even that was thousands of people. I think the team that was rebuilding the web platform was 2,500 people. It was an insanely big program. So I got involved in the e-commerce side, and very often the best way of doing that is from senior sponsorship coming down. If you don't get senior sponsorship around about this, you're done for. So it's senior sponsorship wanting to achieve the benefits that they know they can achieve, and then it's the ground up part of we're excited to work in this new way. We're excited to be aligned to this new vision that we're working towards. And then it's meeting in the middle.
Well, it'd be interesting to talk about it from, I guess, I know obviously with anything, having executive alignment and executive support is one of the fundamentals of how you get success. But for, thinking maybe more, and, we do a lot of, recovery projects, right? So we're coming, we often come in when a project is failing and focused on the outcome of that project, putting in principles that help get it across the line, and get the ROI that they're expecting. One of the challenges is influencing from the middle and getting alignment from the middle, right? Because the project's sitting somewhere in the middle of the organization, and it might be far reaching because it might be an ERP or a HR system or, something that touches everybody, but it's sitting in the middle of the organization. And it's not always easy to get the organization aligned around it when maybe it's not the highest priority on an executive's agenda. So curious if you have advice for people who maybe have constraints right now, not thinking about the entire organization. How do you get enough alignment to achieve objectives, whether it's a project, program, or department, when maybe you can't influence all the way to the top?
Yeah, I mean, that's really difficult. If you're not influencing all the way to the top, you're wondering why the project's happening at all.
Mm.
Because if you don't have that executive sponsorship, then, I mean, is it really something that someone wants to do? I've worked in organizations before when they had literally hundreds of millions of dollars worth of in-flight programs. And it's like no organization can handle that amount of change. No organization has the resources to deliver on that. And the really bad thing for that one example was they were capitalizing all the expenditure, which meant their budgets for the next 5 years were going to be impacted by a bunch of projects that just weren't going to deliver what it should have done. But you need that executive sponsorship. And my advice to anyone that's in that position is, if you don't have executive sponsorship, go and find it. Without it, you're done. You're just mediocre. Everyone is going to come and say, my project's running late, I need to take this team away from you. My needs are higher priority than your needs. And you're just going to be in a world of pain where everyone is abusing you, everyone's taking away what you are, and you can never, ever win in that scenario. So for me, go and get executive sponsorship. If you want to put a process around about it, I would sit down with the team and say, what is it we need to win? Win being a successful delivery, win being getting the results that we need to get. I would list them out. I wouldn't go with a list of 50 things or 20 things, but I'd list 1 or 2 or 3 things out and say, without these things, we're just not going to win. We just can't. So we need an executive sponsor for number 1. Executive sponsor, we need these 2 or 3 things in order to be able to successfully deliver this. If this is a big enough a priority or is important enough, then this is where we need to be. And without doing that, you're kind of, you're spinning your wheels and going to achieve very little, in my experience.
Do you find, though, that sometimes executives, it's the power of the urgent or whatever, where something might be really important to them, but in their day-to-day they get sucked in, by the whatever's the urgent, whatever's the fire, rather than focused on strategically what's important. And so any thoughts around guiding executives through that?
Yeah, I love that. That's when the magic happens. The challenge that you're expressing is having an executive sponsor who doesn't have time to do things. As leader of a program or a middle manager or wherever you are in the organization, your job should be to make your management team's life easier. And if they're actively coming to you and saying, this is strategically important for us, but I need to think about the next 3 months because this thing's on fire, don't worry about it, leave it with me. As long as I've got your approval, I'll make it happen. How exciting is that a position to be in? You've got an executive sponsor who trusts you enough to let you go away and do what you need to do to deliver. Check in with them. You don't want to go rogue for 3 months. Check in, keep them in line, let them know what's happening. If you do have a specific ask, make it easy. Don't go to them with a list of options of, we've hit this problem, what do you think? We've hit this problem, we've got these 5 options. Go to them with we've hit this option, this is what I need. Can you sign off on this one thing so we can keep going? And that for me is when it becomes exciting. I used to work with News Corp, and I reported into I was a consultant, but I was reporting into the CIO there. And I used to love going around News Corp in the UK, going around News Corp and saying, Andy said. And it was fantastic. Andy said anything, and Andy had no idea what Andy had said, Andy being the CTO. I just went around and said, Andy said we need to do this. And okay, if Andy wants it, we'll make it happen. And it was fantastic. And I'd report into him. I'd have a quick kind of like 20-minute meeting with him once a week to tell him what we'd been doing.
What he had said that he didn't know.
what he had said. And to be honest, he was cool. I wasn't kind of doing anything wrong. I was just kind of pushing people forward in the right way. And we built a great relationship because of that, where he trusted me to say Andy said, and he was confident it was going to be reasonable and for the right reasons. And it just gave me the power to go away and do things. So for 20 minutes of his week, he knew that he could give me anything and it would just be fixed in 2 months, 3 months, whatever the time period was. So that exact classic kind of challenge of what if you don't have executive sponsorship, that's an opportunity in my mind.
Mm. I would be interested, you talk a lot about how alignment then equates to profitability and efficiency, or maybe it's effectiveness, but it's pretty intuitive to me, but would love to hear your thoughts around it.
Sure. I tend to focus on the customer side of things, but it works as well with internal efficiencies. The reason I tend not to get too excited by internal efficiencies is the number of projects I've seen where they've said, if we do this project, we can make 30 people redundant or we can save percent in costs. And then you go back a year later and actually they've not made anyone redundant. They've actually redeployed everyone. The 10% cost savings is now gone into a different project that failed and it's been wasted. And one, I'm not particularly a fan of making people redundant, and cost savings that don't actually transpire into being cost savings doesn't get me out of bed. But the customer side of it, I love. I really do. That's what gets me really excited. And I go back all the way to, was it 1997 or something like that, when Jeff Bezos sent out to all of his shareholders one of his famous annual letters. And I have it on a slide somewhere. I show it so often in my slideshows. And it says, we're going to ruthlessly focus on our customers. And I love that because it's the customer. You can have investors give you money. That's great. You can save money. That's great. But the only people that's adding cash into your business is your customer. It's only people. Everyone else is taking something out. Investors, they'll give it to you for a short period and then they want to take it out in 5 years' time. But the only way you have a profitable, viable business is if you can understand what your customers want, how they want it, how you can make their problems or their gains work for them so that they give you money. And if you do it really, really well, they'll give you more money. And that has to be how you become efficient. But by aligning everything around about what your customers' needs are, how it operates, so that if you're in a B2B world, your salespeople are talking to your marketing people, are talking to your customer service, talking to your account management team, talking to operations, and you get that flow working, then that's when your customers start to give you money. They start to be happy with the service you're providing, and they start to, and it's the same in B2C. I remember, I think it was Peter Drucker wrote a book years and years and years ago, and it doesn't appear that anyone's ever read the book, but he was doing this exact thing of organizations are organized vertically within functions, but your customer isn't. Your customer is horizontal. It cuts through all of your organization. And if you're not aligned to what your customer is trying to achieve, your own internal structure will start to cause you problems.
What are your thoughts? Sorry, I lost my thought for a second, then it came back to me because we're talking, that focus on the customer. What about those organizations that say, we're going to focus on our employee? I get they're taking something out, but around the idea that if we focus on take care of our employees will take care of our customer. Or does it change within an organization, like who you're talking about within the organization?
No, I like that because ultimately you're still focusing on your customer. You're just recognizing that the CEO isn't the one that's talking to 1,000 customers. It's your employees. So within an organization, you've got the classic pyramid of the CEO at the top and pretty much the customer-facing people at the bottom. I like to invert that. I think the CEO is at the bottom, and the CEO's job then is to facilitate and enable the people who are talking to your customer to do the best job. They've got the tools, they've got the training, they've got the resources they need to make that customer experience perfect. So if you reverse that pyramid, it makes perfect sense. The CEO and the leadership team are focusing on the employees, and the employees are focusing on the customer. And then that's an alignment in itself.
I think the last question I'd kind of like to touch on before we wrap up would be around how do you see the companies, so obviously to stay aligned, communication is is really key. And there are many ways to communicate, and I think probably all of them have their pluses and minuses. So how do you see communication used in keeping a company aligned?
Man, you've given me the best question at the end, and we can talk for the next hour and a half on this just as itself. Communication is obviously key, but it's very much the right communication at the right time, and that, I think, is the key for it. It used to be water cooler talk was so important within organizations, and it was one of the best ways of communicating. You'd overhear someone on a phone call, or you'd talk to them at the water cooler and things like that. And then COVID came along and no one went to the office anymore, and we had to change how we communicate. And that's fundamentally changed everything. But what it has meant is that people are now getting fed up being in too many meetings. They're not going to meetings. So meetings are having to change. The agenda has to be better. You see much more, at least I see much more, people actually sending out what the objective of the meeting is, what the agenda of the meeting is. And it's almost kind of like a little OKR for the meeting. It's like, this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is how we know we'll have achieved it. So for me, it's making that communication much more focused on what you're trying to do at the time, taking things offline, going back to our agile conversation, having a daily stand-up that is 15 minutes, and you don't get into the weeds of the issue. You just talk about, there is an issue. I need to speak to these 4 people. So straight after the stand-up, we'll go away and have a little huddle and we'll do it ourselves. So it's making that communication effective. I remember with a company in Switzerland, it was a marketplace company. So a bunch of engineers who are all very vocal on, you're wasting my time, I'm in meetings too often. So I designed a format for them. And across the company, I think it was about 7% of the time was based on meetings. And that was it. We got it down to 7%. That was your daily stand-up. That was your demo at the end of your sprint. It was your planning within the sprint. It was talking to other departments and other teams. So that actually 7% of the time was an overhead to make sure the communication was working and everyone was aligned to achieving the same outcome. And for me, 7% is brilliant. The number of companies that waste 20, 30, 40% of their day trying to align and doing it badly, So make sure it's effective. Make sure you've got an objective. Make sure you know what you're trying to achieve and who needs to be there. If you don't need to be there, go somewhere else. If you can communicate on an email, communicate on an email. If you're the CEO, do regular town halls and tell everyone and update everyone on where we are. But it's keep it appropriate to what it is you're trying to say and when you're trying to say it.
Yeah. And, I think in some ways it's hard, like even on the meeting front, those people who like the structure of, having the meeting versus the impromptu call. And so there's a lot of balancing, I guess. One, like you're saying, like making sure you're communicating the frequencies correct, the avenues correct. But I guess there's a lot of differences of opinion on what does correct look like, because there's a lot of preference.
Yeah, and completely. And I think part of that is also recognizing that meetings are part of the organization, part of the culture. So you can't view a meeting as overhead. You've got to view meeting as a need to achieve what you're trying to achieve. So it's really not an overhead if you're talking about something that's valuable, if you're talking about something that will help you go away and do your job and make it better and make the customer experience better. That's part of the design, that's part of the solution. It's not an overhead, really. So, and that's culture. Getting that into the culture of, I need to go to this meeting because I need to be part of this solution. I need to be part of what we're going to give to our customers. Then that's a big win to get people to engage with meetings that previously they'd think were overheads, were waste of their time and things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jim, it's been a fun conversation. I'd love to hear the 3 things you want to leave top of mind with people.
Yeah, sure. Culture is a big thing. Alignment at all levels of the organization. Without executive sponsorship, you're really going to be struggling. So always go for that. And if you don't have that, make it work.
Excellent. And how can folks get in touch with you or learn more about what you do?
Probably the easiest way, I have websites, but the easiest way is through LinkedIn. So I'm Jim Stevenson at LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jim.
Thanks a lot, Jana.
And to our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.